To me, my X-Men, Andrew, and this is Gayties Toys. On today's MIA 80s Ladies, we're going to be doing a bit of a weird one in the sense that it's, a toy line that started in the early 90s, but certainly, spread its wings throughout the 90s. And likewise, at least one character who we got, frankly, a few figures of, but much like, the Janine Melnitz from Ghostbusters effect, not quite right. So let's just get right into ToyBiz's X-Men, Husk, and Jean Grey. If somehow you don't know what X-Men are, they were created by, sort of comic book legends, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and the first issue would launch in 1963, featuring the first original 5 X-Men. The series, especially amongst that first wave of Marvel Comics, was not as successful as its, brothers and sisters, so it really did sort of languish in reprints for a number of years, hoping that no one would notice. That would change, however, in 1975, when Len Wein and Dave Cockrum would do a sort of a relaunch of the X-Men with Giant Size X-Men #1, where they introduced a brand new team, all new characters, and, from there, Chris Claremont would really steer the ship for the next couple of decades, with the X-Men becoming just amongst the zeitgeist, the most relatable, the most popular, the best-selling, film and merchandising juggernaut. I mean, the X-Men are quite easily one of the most popular teams in fiction, frankly. I mean, they serve fashion, they fight, and they fuck. One very important point in history regarding their merchandising would be in 1991. ToyBiz had at least some success with the Batman 1989 line, but DC Comics was not happy with what else they were doing. So their tenure as the DC license holder was very brief. They did, however, also have Marvel at the time, and again, after kind of a bit of a blunder early on, they decided to course correct and do X-Men, launching that new toy line in 1991. The launch of the toy line more or less coincided with another huge X-Men relaunch, that being the Jim Lee sort of, new costume phenomenon that would go on to inform X-Men for the next decade and beyond, frankly. The first wave did include very much the giant-size X-Men team. Very wisely, Cyclops, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, even Archangel, and Storm. And Storm's a very important character to discuss in this context. I discussed this in my very first video, sort of outlining, kind of the history of female action figures. If you know me, I love that term. ToyBiz was not happy with Storm's, sales, so they pretty much, almost publicly, but it was very much an open secret that they were, just adamant to not produce any more female figures for the X-Men or any Marvel line. Fans of the X-Men, especially fans knowing that women are a massive backbone of the team, were not happy to hear this. And someone who really sort of led the charge against this was Brian Cunningham over at Wizard magazine. He was originally the editor of their toying around toy column each month, and would eventually become the editor of Toy Fair when that spun out of the magazine, and then ran for many, many years beyond that. He really put ToyBiz on blast, threw them under the bus at every opportunity, saying this is just outrageous. And wave after wave, year after year, this continued. We would get just the most baffling, weird character choices, but never a Rogue, never a Psylocke, never a Jean Grey, never an actual good-looking Storm. This would come to a head when, members of the comic book industry, heavyweight writers like Dave Cockrum, would write into Brian Cunningham and say, "Hey, this is ridiculous. And, we know what ToyBiz is doing. We don't approve. Women are, a facet for X-Men, and particularly as the X-Men animated series launched, Rogue, Storm, Jean Grey, Jubilee, these became, huge, popular cultural touch points. I mean, everyone knew who their names were, and to see them not in the toy line consistently was getting pointed. And if that reminds you of someone, ToyBiz would eventually acquiesce. In 1993, they would do a re-release of Storm, the really bad figure, however in sort of silver colors with a cape, much more akin to her look in the comics and the cartoon. Likewise, they pretty much went out and said, "Hey, okay, we hear you for Wave 7, 1993, we're going to do Rogue. You've demanded Rogue, she's very popular, you'd better buy her." Likewise, around that time and the following year, they were sort of doing a line to coincide with the Phoenix saga happening in the cartoon. And they said, "Hey, maybe we'll throw in a Phoenix for the Phoenix saga wave as a little treat." The Rogue figure was ugly. But the fact is That's all we thought we were going to get. So, we bought her, and we bought the Phoenix, who admittedly is actually a great figure to this day. I'll stand by that. ToyBiz sort of saw the writing on the wall. They saw what was happening in the industry with, McFarlane Toys, pushing adult collectibles, pushing women. They saw Star Trek, Ninja Turtles, all these other, people starting to really, cash in on the female figure craze that was starting to happen in the mid-90s. And they said, okay, we're on board. We vow every single wave going forward, there's going to be at least one female figure in each wave, and they're really going to make up for lost time. And truly they did. From that point forward, I mean, they really made the core cast. They made a lot of villains. They made some supporting characters. They really, and this went line wide across Fantastic Four, Avengers, Iron Man, all of these sort of sublines within Marvel. They really did push women out, and it was like great to see that they were, at the vanguard of not only, adult collectible market, but also, the female figure craze that, still is standard today. Now, I could talk about X-Men for hours. I'm not going to do that. And I could, again, go into every single, lady mutant or lady ally or anyone within the X-Men sphere that they didn't get to. It's a few, but granted, again, they did pretty good in a short amount of time. What I will talk about today is two figures that had been prototyped or at least proposed and just didn't make the cut. And two of them are, one's great, the other's, it's too bad, but I don't really care. So we're going to start off with the easy one, and that being Generation X's Husk. Throughout the 90s, the X-Men became less, school for gifted youngsters and more kind of a standard superhero kind of comic book. So to remedy that, Generation X was launched in 1994, and that was really sort of the next class of young mutants under the tutorship of now Banshee and the White Queen. The figures would, of course, from ToyBiz be a subline within the X-Men whole, and they would, coincide with the launch of the comic book as well as a 1996 TV movie that is atrocious, and you could probably find on YouTube. I recommend it. Compared to their compatriots, the Generation X toy line was a bit of an odd duck. They ran a little tall, they lacked articulation, the sculpting wasn't great, let's just say. But at the very least, we did finally get our first, say, Jubilee, the White Queen. The first wave would have, other women like Penance. I mean, they weren't shy on that. That said, the line only ran for 2 series, and we didn't really get a full, complete team. Specifically, Husk and M. Technically, we kind of got M because Penance was made, but that's also a very confusing story, so I don't want to get into it. But nevertheless, an actual M figure was never really planned, as far as we know. That said, Husk was prototyped. There was sort of, a design for her, there was a prototype made. That character is also kind of a bit of a strange one. She is the sister of Cannonball, who has many, many brothers and sisters, and being, a good old farm girl from the Midwest, she had a power where she could rip her skin off and a new power would be underneath. It was very gross and very strange and very much, in the corn husk of it all. The other character in question is someone who did actually get quite a few figures, but the problem here being is that they were bad, very awful. In order to kind of catch up and pump out a lot of new, women in the line, ToyBiz did do a lot of repainting. We would see, Polaris come out of a Rogue figure. We saw, a lot of, just kit bashing of sorts, just sort of push things out. They had a whole wave of figures called She-Force that was supposed to fill the gap here. For Jean Grey, her first figure was actually a Domino repaint, which on its face wasn't terrible. However, they did decide to keep all of Domino's, strappy belts, and they painted them silver. And she looked ridiculous. She came with a gun. It was a stupid figure. She would get more. I'd say within the Onslaught wave, we would get their first, fully sculpted, Jean Grey figure. However, again, ugly, hideous, way too tall, not a good figure. Again, she would come in other variations, but we wouldn't get a good Jean Grey figure until the very end. Until we didn't. At Toy Fair 1998, ToyBiz would unveil another subline within the X-Men franchise, and that would be called Flying Fighters, and it was a very, very small little wave, but very cool. We would get our first Maggot figure, we got an Age of Apocalypse Sinister, a more classic giant-sized Cyclops, and most importantly, Jean Grey, a very, very good-looking Jean Grey with a sort of, kind of phoenix flying feature in the back. She was gorgeous. This is the figure we always should have gotten. However, had that line actually gone through, they probably would have nixed Jean Grey and put in Wolverine because, of course, you can't have any line without Wolverine. So to date, this is one of those cases where we got some Jean Greys. They're bad. We could have got a good one though. And this is coming from, a Jean Grey hater. I know that there's some Jean Grey fans out there. I don't know if you are Legion or if you are just very loud. I just am very confused because when you have boring old Jean and a plethora of other really great characters, I don't know where the confusion here is. The future's bright for both of these characters. Of course, X-Men have long had many cartoons, action figure lines, movies. I mean, there's been no shortage of Jean Grey figures, and frankly, the Marvel Legends team currently is seemingly in love with Jean Grey. Like these other people, I don't understand. For the '90s costume specifically, there's been quite a few, looks over the years, quite a few figures between Legends, Mafex. There's a lot of options there, so your bases are covered there. Husk and Generation X specifically have gotten a little less love, but luckily in 2024 we would finally see an M figure who would sort of launch this subline within Marvel Legends, and likewise in 2025 we finally did get Husk figure, which at the very least she did have kind of a skin ripping feature. At least we can finally see how at least Marvel Legends would make this power happen. It's very unclear how the original ToyBiz line would do this, but at the very least, they started strong. They started with the two characters we didn't get back in the day, and frankly, I'm really looking forward to seeing more of them, getting a full team, because it's starting to come together, kids. As for other ladies from the ToyBiz line, I mean there's a few, but I mean frankly, like I do really believe as a a female action figure historian that ToyBiz's inclusion of women was very monumental. I mean, this was a huge line at the time. It was, all eyes were on it, and the fact that they did a pivot and publicly and apologetically said, no more, we're on board. We're going to, commit to doing women. It really sort of, sent a shot across the bow to other toy companies to do the same. And frankly, to this day, there's, some holdouts from that time who refused to make female figures, superpowers. But at the very least, I mean, this was very much a turning point and very much, a moment where fans did speak out and say, like, yeah, we do want these figures. You can't have a complete team without these. And this is the mission statement. This is the whole reason for the season. So I have very fond feelings. Maybe not the first couple waves of very bizarre choices of ToyBiz, but it was really great to see the turnaround and see the love given to some of my just absolute favorite characters in comic books, in fiction. So with all that, I thank you for watching, thank you for liking, subscribing, commenting, all those YouTubey things, and I will see you next time on MIA 87.